Oh, hey everyone, welcome to AMA number 56. It's a special AMA today because we have Matt back. I think this is your first AMA for like 3 years, Matt.
It's been a
So,
while now. I've been back with the project for a minute, but we haven't had me on any of the AMAs.
okay, well, so it's an honor to have Matt back, and we also have Art and Mary. So, welcome everybody. And I'm going to hand over to Mary. It's a slightly special AMA. I guess it's like partly a retrospective, which is one of the internal practices when we look at what's been happening over a period of time and what can be improved and what do we want to focus on in the next period. So Mary, with that intro, why don't you tell us what's coming up for the next hour today?
Sure. So we're doing things a little bit differently today. I mean, obviously, we're going to be talking about the Holo launch, but before we get there, we really thought it would be a good idea to go back and sort of bring people along for the ride, essentially. We've been at this for, I liked Matt's term, a minute, um, maybe 2 minutes or three. And a lot has happened. And I'm not sure that everybody who's following the project today are all the same people who've been following the project, through the years. Obviously, we know some of y'all are. And we thought it would be fun to, as David said, do a little bit of a catch people up and kind of look back at where we started and how we got here. And then we'll jump into what we're doing today and have some chats about what's coming up. So why don't we start things up? We got a little presentation. We'll be talking through all of this. So it's not just some animated slideshow, but all right, who wants to start? I think everybody should just come off mute. We should just be having a conversation.
Yeah,
Sounds great.
let's jump.
Art, you dive in. How did this all start, Arthur?
Oh,
Yeah, did
go
everybody
back,
see
go
the
back.
license plate there that with Luis that's over my shoulder? Yeah. That was one of our Portugal work group things where we took a whole team to Portugal, ended up with a Holo license plate out of it. But yeah, and then on the next screen it says the very first, code base commit. Actually, technically, the first GitHub commit was New Year's Eve 2016. This is how Eric and I party. Instead of like partying, we opened the Holochain repo and started building Holochain on New Year's Eve 2016. But so really all this emerged in 2017, including the first hackathon that happened at Matt's house in San Francisco, just like 6 or 8 weeks later. Like it happened in March. Yeah,
February. It
and
happened in February. Yeah.
February. Oh, okay. Sorry, in February. And so we went from zero to being able to build apps pretty quickly on the prototype version of Holochain, and continued working with that prototype version of Holochain all the way through a crowdfunding round at the end of the year that was really, it wasn't crowdfunding in the traditional sense or in the newer sense of equity crowdfunding. It was an Indiegogo campaign for Holo, actually selling Holoports and getting announcing the Holo hosting network.
Yeah, that was pretty wild. I wasn't full time working on everything with you guys, well, at this point. And I remember getting the emails and the updates from this going, whoa, this changed a lot in like 3 months because I had been playing a little bit before you guys got the uh the 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 group in California started. So it was really, really quick that the stuff moved.
Yeah. It's funny what happens when you put a whole bunch of people from around the world into one house. You cover all the walls and whiteboards and like, okay, we're going in a direction. Let's see if we can get there, you know. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's go.
and
Let's go.
one of the big changes that I think you're pointing to, Mary, is that, we were talking about Holochain, but we weren't talking about Holo at that time, and we actually created the Holo hosting context to take to be able to reach mainstream users, and also as a kind of revenue and funding model for Holochain.
Yep. Which is a perfect segue into our initial community offering. So when everybody was out there doing ICOs that were coin offerings, we did it differently. And we did initial community offering, and we did some really cool, actually, I just want to say, if we have the links anywhere, there's some fabulous, fabulous blog posts that the team wrote, and Art, that you in particular wrote back in 2018 that I don't know if they're out there that we can throw them out on the channels. I think we should, because that was those were pretty inspirational.
Yeah, I think one of the blog posts was about oh shoot, now I can't remember what it was called now, but like being able to do responsible ICOs. And so we did a lot of weird things. Like we used the Kickstarter campaign and as one of the factors driving what the cap was on the ICO, as far as like what the demand was for boxes being sold, and also apps being developed, and we literally gathered metrics from GitHub for developers working on the prototype version of Holochain as demonstration of demand for what the cap was on what we could raise on our ICO. And so the cap was moving daily as people bought more Holoports and or contributed apps and that kind of thing. Yeah, ethical ICOs maybe.
Yeah, that was one of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
This,
And
that was a really interesting feature too. I mean, coming in and having to talk about that was pretty wild. But I still tell people that story about the way that we connected the ICO raise to the level of activity in our ecosystem. And like, even today, because we still have to take all of our ICO information, everything that we did, all the ways that we wrote up all of our terms and did all of our legal and did all of our due diligence on everything and did the whitelist, all of that stuff that we did is like written up in this crazy report that we still have to submit on a regular basis to people for, as a due diligence kind of exercise. So it's just fascinating how much that still comes up in, in operations world.
And I'll just say, you go ahead, Arthur.
good. Oh, I was going to say, yeah, just because a demand for a token doesn't mean there's actually any demand for the product. And we were trying to actually demonstrate some demand for the product.
Yeah. And constrain ourselves to raising appropriately relative to that. Yeah. And it was a wild ride. Like, not just the ICO, but everything leading up to it, right? We were trying to be responsible. We were trying to find a jurisdiction to be operating out of that would suit us, that would allow us not just to do this fundraising stuff, but to be able to interact with the larger banking and regulatory system more generally. So there was a lot of learning. There was a lot of stumbling and exploration and figuring out like, oh, nobody is going to give us here's your gold stamp, you're safe. Like, they don't really do that all the time when you're doing new things in the world.
And it's just worth mentioning, part of why we chose Gibraltar is that they actually wrote their regulations from a more neutral vantage point about decentralized ledger tech, DLT, as opposed to blockchain. Many other groups or many other jurisdictions were actually putting things in place that were specific to blockchain. And as Holochain not being a blockchain, trying to be regulated as if it's a blockchain creates a whole bunch of weird tensions. And so we picked a jurisdiction that seemed to be abstracting the pattern correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. And the world's changed a lot since then, because the big players have started putting a lot more in those areas, but it's still true that there's a lot more of that fluidity or that kind of principle first approach going on here, which is cool.
When she
Yeah.
says here,
Also,
she says that because she's the
some
one in Gibraltar.
yeah, exactly. Also, in that period, it is probably for everyone watching hard to set the scene. But if you can go back to 2018, listening to Art explaining holochain to a regulator. And we went through many iterations. I wonder, like 2017, probably this falls into. Like we're going through many iterations of the green paper, going through with on the legal side as people were getting their heads around different currency designs, and people like I think we take it a little bit for granted now, but people really hadn't started thinking too much about currencies back then. And so there was so much that needed to be built layer by layer by layer in terms of the understanding of people even getting their heads around the kind of blockchain token space, let alone
Yeah.
some of the things that we were talking about. I mean, I look back now and people must have been literally like watching our mouths move half the time, you know, just saying yes.
Yeah, it's interesting because there were not really stable coins yet
No,
as a thing. Like Tether had just come into existence and was at the time having problems with their banking relationships and different stuff. Nobody knew whether it was going to be around very long. Um, and and we were talking about value stability based on correlation of value to delivering real world service like hosting.
yeah,
And that was definitely something confusing as the sort of value stability by pegging to a dollar, or pegging to a currency was also kind of competing in the meme space.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. Well, that was also the days where people were issuing like product-based tokens, and then I'd speak to them and I'm like, well, how would you pay back your debt, or what happens if the token price changes and you can't deliver your products? And they'll be like, oh yeah, that was fine, that will be fine. But then of course that all crashed. So yeah, but I mean, and it was, I think also, again, I'm not sure how many people watching from that period, but one of the coolest things has been 6 years on. It's only us and Chainlink from that period that have consistently been like above like the low level marker of success and have continued to forge our own way. And I mean, I know they actually flown back from Denver and was sitting next to one of the senior guys at Chainlink, and we're sharing stories over the last 6 years of the different paths that we've taken. But it's been interesting because they went out in their particular direction, focused on oracles, and with a much broader set of intentions and industries and products and solution, I guess, and framework that we're focused on. So yeah, it's nice for me. I can see that sort of parallel weaving as well as a, a project of that same era. And yeah, tracking our path in the next few years as we're about to start moving to going to be very interesting.
And then we hit 2019. And what was the when holoports, when holoport, when holoport, when holoport, when holoport. There were a few others, but holoports went out in 2019. And it was really interesting because this was we were ready for hardware, but we weren't, and we had the holoport OS updating. But man, getting this out with an automatic update to 2,000 people, receiving these around the world, a lot of excitement. We started dealing with a whole new level of customer support over the holidays. And yeah, it was some crazy stuff. But there were a lot of other things going on that year. I mean, obviously, we had holoports working. We had a holoport OS. We had people updating. We had a network, and we had people able to log in. I think people were able to log in, weren't they? Because we
Yeah,
changed the whole user experience. I think the next year for
right.
the host
Well,
console, but I think we did
one
have
of
a
the
version of the host
challenges
console.
one of the challenges that we were having in 2019 in terms of getting the Holo network, this Holo software working, is that part of what Holo does is it has different apps that run on Holochain. Um,
Yep.
and that version of Holochain that we had at the time was just not proving reliable. And there's going to be more about that in the next screen, but we really kind of at the end of this year, we're identifying um, uh, some of the instabilities in that version of Holochain.
Yep. Yep. And then we moved during that time frame, we were working a lot on getting the license for Holochain put together so that we got it. I think most of the work happened in 2019, but then it got approved by the OSI in 2020. That's when we really started sharing about it. There's a whole bunch of blog posts about that. So if you're not familiar with the Holochain license, it's the CAL, the cryptographic autonomy license. And there's tons of readme, not readmes. Well, there's readmes probably too, and some of the repos. But there's a blog post that kind of are explainers by us, by Art, by me, and also by our attorney who was working on it. And now these days, actually, you can search for it. There's a lot of other ones. It's kind of interesting to go out there and read what other people have said. So here's
Yeah.
your follow on, Art. Yeah.
Yeah, as far as I know, there's no other license that protects the rights of end users in a distributed system, like that they get to own their private keys and that kind of thing. Still to this day, I don't think there's any other licenses that are really designed for distributed, peer-to-peer cryptographic systems. And yeah, then the first bullet on here identified the need for a holochain rebuild, and then we released a rebuilt holochain 6 months later. I mean, basically in March of 2020, we created a little skunkworks team inside the company. And first of all, let me just say, uh, as kind of the original architect of holochain, I thought we had sort of embodied so much of that in the prototype version that it was safe for me and needed for me to step over into the Holo side of the house and start building the Holo hosting dev team, which at the time of the ICO we had none, right? So we actually had to start building the whole Holo hosting side of the house. And so, Eric and Nico and we're really leading the Holochain side of the house. And it's really hard to get distributed system state management right. Like, it may seem like blockchains are complex, and they are, but at least they're managing every node taking one next state, making the same next state change together, kind of in lockstep, where Holochain is basically letting every node reach eventual consistency, receiving things in different orders and sharding. So different nodes may be receiving different things, and you still have to manage an overall eventual consistency and make sure that the data is alive and reachable across all the nodes. And that's a much more complex thing. And in order to get a sort of handle on that complexity, they had created another state model, a sort of redux tree type state model in Rust, um, to be able to view the state because the state was so complicated. But what that ended up doing is basically saying we had two different types of state. We had the Redux representation of it, and we had the underlying cryptographic state. And the devs were mostly working with the Redux representation. And there was a decoupling that happened between those states, which ended up basically meaning the underlying cryptographic state actually wasn't being guaranteed.
Yeah.
And so we ended up basically saying we need to rebuild focused only on the cryptographic state. And the RSM stood for refactored state model, but the truth is it was really just the original state model dropping off the overlay,
Right.
and keeping everybody focused on maintaining the cryptographic integrity. And
Let me just say something, Art, because like
yeah.
that's a great technical description in a lot of ways, but like the users back then, they were doing this third bullet. This is like we were literally releasing elemental chat on the first version, on the Redux version of Holochain, I think. didn't we?
No, no, we did that in December of this
Oh
year on the
gosh.
new.
See, it's so hard to go, like, we get the years confused just looking. I mean, even following like this whole presentation, like in my mind, we were doing that on the
No, one of
original.
the
We were
problems
doing
was
some app testing.
we weren't getting data consistency at all on the previous version.
What
We were
apps
never
were we
reaching.
testing?
What's that?
We were testing apps with
We,
users on Redux though.
oh, we built Elemental Chat at that time,
Okay.
but we didn't do the test until December after the September release of RSM.
Got it.
Yeah.
And that's when people started experiencing like
Actually, you'll see
real time.
in the next, actually, I think it's even in the next year that it's saying that's when we did the 5,000 hosted user test.
Oh yeah. That was crazy. That was
Yeah.
crazy. Like one chat app with all these people trying to like have all these different channels going on with signals going back and forth across. But it was hosted, so it was really interesting. Just really, really interesting. So, but it was just for all of you who participated, if you guys were around during the, I don't know if anybody's done a poll out on the live community that's watching about when you guys started following the project, but if you were around during the elemental chat days, it was crazy because this is, you know, most chat applications are not meant for everybody to see everything all the time and get all of these updates. And I mean, I know we have Telegram and you guys kind of do that, but Telegram's so like split up. There's so many different groups and you kind of get your messages and you see them later. But we would have these sessions that were like coordinated for like, okay, we're going to be online. And then everybody would try to be there at the same time. And it was just nuts. So oh yeah, 2021. Nathan joined the team. Woohoo! Nice.
Yeah. I remember we had an amazing AMA with
1,600
community.
people.
Yeah, well, no. Here in 2020, the first one where we had community Holoport owners also on Elemental Chat showing off their holoports and like watching as their holoports were like providing all of this chat infrastructure. And that was one of the real like it's just a marker for me at that moment of how Holo specifically in its implementation has the power to connect, you know, like technically it's like to connect infrastructure in our homes or spare capacity, but in that moment it's also the community infrastructure where it's like that paving the way for applications to be able to have, you know, their community members actually providing the infrastructure so that users who don't have that same infrastructure can also participate in this application. And like seeing Elemental Chat represent that pattern in its like early alpha form, I think was fantastic, and it was amazing to speak to some of our community members who, you know, bought their Holo ports a few years before and get them to have that new experience, even though Holo wasn't going live at that time. They could have this new alpha experience and set pathway for now what's coming a few years later.
Right. There were still a lot of changes happening in Holochain. And that continued over the last couple of years. I mean, it started, I mean, obviously we got the RSM, which kind of got us to a little bit of stability around our state modeling, but there was still so much to be built from there forward. And
Yeah.
so
We managed to leapfrog the previous version of Holochain in terms of its free features back in the previous year, but that version of Holochain never reached feature complete. Like it still was short of a lot of the things that we wanted to do. So,
yep.
yeah.
Yeah. So it was just about this time that we weren't even able to test all of the building of Holochain and like the apps themselves that we were using to test Holochain features. And that's why we started the Holoport Alpha program, because Holoports allow us to have test networks essentially. And we've been having that go on for quite a while, and it's been invaluable. I mean, it's really allowed us to be able to do testing across Holo and Holochain and all the applications that have gotten built. And now it's also being used to be able to test apps that are being built by community members. prior to them getting launched as well. So that's really amazing.
Now you're
So
jumping to the next screen.
yeah, we should jump.
But wait, actually, let me say one thing about elemental chat. Somebody pointed out some people don't know what that is.
I'll just say one other thing, which is, so I left the team for a little while at the beginning of 2020, along with some other folks. And so I was getting to watch all this from the outside, right? I wasn't inside the org. I wasn't participating in these bits, but it was great to see, oh my goodness, like this stuff is starting to become real. Like we're getting to play with these things. We're getting to host these things. We're getting to do chat stuff, right? So chat stuff is not the most complicated thing in the world, but to do those things in distributed ways and then do those things in ways that are hosted but distributedly hosted, great. You know, it was wonderful seeing all of that and cheering from the sidelines.
What were you saying about elemental chat, Art?
Oh, just that somebody commented that some people may not know what that is. It's sort of a Slack-like kind of app. And one of the things is that in the early days of Holochain, it seemed like everybody was building chats. And so we had a whole bunch of different messaging and chat apps. And then Elemental just became like, let's make a simple one. Let's just keep it down to the elements.
Let's keep going.
Yeah.
Some years we slow down. Cool. Well, we got through some things that really mattered in 2022. And in particular, I just want to say the audit, getting to a point where we could do an audit on our cryptography and key management within Holochain was just a huge like milestone. And I know that's the last thing there, but it was the thing that showed up on the previous slide title, and that it was super meaningful. And to get through that and know that we were able to move forward with some security, like with our modeling right there was massive. So made a huge difference. But we did a lot in 2002 or 2022, sorry, not 2002. Let's not go that far back. Although some of us do.
But it's also worth mentioning the first bullet here, like you were saying that other apps were starting to test on the Holo network, and we were able to use the Holo network for, that kind of thing.
How long did you have Newsfeed running on Holo?
I think that's been the longest running app. The problem is I don't really know because Holo, when they started making some changes to their infrastructure, at some point broke it, and I don't
Got it.
I don't know
It was a long
when they
time
broke
though.
it.
I mean, like it was intentional for like 3 months, and then it went on like 6-8 months or something like that.
Yeah, like 8 or 9 months, I think.
Yeah, that was great. We had to do some updates on the network.
And what was
exactly.
Newsfeed? Newsfeed is kind of like a Holochain based Twitter like app, right? Something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think a lot of I just want to say, like, there's a bunch of stuff, pictures on this one that are really showing some things that were super important. This is when we started working on some educational initiatives, and we did the first week-long immersive, and then continued iterating on that immersive online with online immersives the next year. So it really transformed. There's so many like developers now that are like high level, really effective developers in the Holochain ecosystem that came out of these immersive programs. And it's just want to say thanks to the folks who worked on that. We had a lot of hard work, both inside the team and outside of the team with partners on that work. And it really, really has paid off. So it's great.
I actually want to name a couple of partners because they're on the screen here. We've got Marcus Phillips in the lower picture facing us, who led those trainings, and Guillaume, who trained Marcus to do the training essentially. But Guillaume, who was with us all along and has built so many important parts of the infrastructure. And in fact, when we were doing the initial Skunkworks, like before we started the little Skunkworks team in March, Guillaume came out and worked with me for a week to do all the documentation of the new Holochain design. And he technically built the first version of Holochain in the Holochain playground. So while we were building it, he was building a simulated version, but it was still a fully functional simulated version. And anyway, just worth mentioning. Guillaume's kind of a rock star.
And in addition to that, Guillem and some of the other community members were hosting their own ecosystem developer trainings. Not with some support and assistance at times from some Holochain team members, but like that was our ecosystem was so passionate and so wanting other people to be able to build that they just showed up and hosted a bunch of these workshops and sessions teaching other people how to build apps. So it was really wonderful to see. And even though I'm not much of a developer, I joined those and I started learning how to build Holochain apps thanks to that crew. So thank you.
Yeah, I thought we had a bullet there about the dev camps, the community-led dev camps, and then I didn't see it, or we didn't say anything about it. But
Oh
anyway,
yeah, those were a little earlier. Those would have been back in 2021, 2020 actually. Wow, no, those would have been 2019 and 2020, right?
yeah,
Because we didn't even talk about like the things that were going on in the globe during some of this time, which is like COVID and lockdowns and all that other crazy stuff.
that's
So,
right.
had
And
some
before
major
COVID
effects.
and lockdown, a lot of hackathons.
Yeah,
We did a
exactly.
lot of, and I did a lot of travel. I was in 2018, I was in 29 countries, many of them several times. And then in 2019, I was in 19 countries.
Jeez.
In 2020, I was in 8 or so just in the first month, and then everything shut down. And I along with some other folks, had got to go sit out for a while. So,
Yeah. So moving on
2023.
into 2023. 2023, we went back out in the world. So, Holochain, Holochain was not ready for prime time. The world had been shut down quite a bit. The communities that, like what you were just talking about, like the all the live event stuff had like really slowed down. Everybody was still doing almost everything online, even through 2022. They started coming back, but it was like a slow kind of sort of coming. People weren't quite ready, after some of that. And I think the timing was really interesting because in 2023, we wanted to get out in the world and we wanted to see people, we wanted to hear from people, we wanted to experience like something visceral in working with people and taking Holochain out. And so that's when we did, and we went to conferences. We started doing some more real live events and demonstrations. We went to unconferences, all sorts of things, and really kind of had a growth focus with Holochain. And that's a lot also because Holochain was ready and we were able to build demos. We were able to build apps that were longer lasting and users could install and use and we could do some demos on. We're still having some, challenges different here and there. I mean, Holochain is like, I think it would behoove us to say some things about Holochain again, Arthur, about this, because the journey of development in Holochain had continued through 2021, 2022, 2023. And we were still building key things or making changes to key aspects of the stack in Holochain. In making all of this come to life. And I don't know that we've like all the networking changes that happened. I mean, at a certain point in time, we were giving weekly updates on dev changes. And I think half of the things we were writing in those updates were probably not understandable by the vast majority of our readers, but it's what we were focused on.
Yeah, well, that beta 1 version of Holochain had proxies in the middle for connections, and that required relaying of traffic, and it was a solution that would work for anybody, because that's why we implemented it first, is because it would work 100% of the time. But it was, where Holochain's supposed to be a peer-to-peer infrastructure, there was really not a way of making peer-to-peer connections except through a proxy, which is more centralized than we wanted. And in the attempt to decentralize further, and we had worked with different things like libp2p, and in the prototype version of Holochain used libp2p from Protocol Labs and IPFS, but didn't quite serve our needs. So we actually, in the beta 1 version here, we're trying to work with some of the Quinn tools from MadeSafe. We were trying to collaborate, work collaboratively with other communities and not have to kind of reinvent the wheel. And then we sort of went to the next level of that by saying, well, where is peer-to-peer functionality actually really happening in the commercial space? And that was with WebRTC, like being able to make real-time connections between peers on a network, which is what the RTC part of WebRTC stands for. And so Holochain Beta 2 was a switch over to WebRTC, which yeah, had didn't had its own problems because it's not RTC isn't really built for peer-to-peer. And
Right.
so we've really just moved past some of those RTC issues with the latest beta 3 release that is happening
I think
right
it's really
now.
interesting that you're the way that you're talking about it, because this is the challenge, right? You can say, oh, we've got this technology and it uses these three other technologies as a baseline. But when you try to do something different with those underlying tech, layers, it doesn't mean it works for the intention that you're doing in a larger thing. You can run into a lot of hiccups and a lot of issues, even if they're really good, valid, tools and libraries in and of themselves. It doesn't mean that they all go together and that they all end up allowing you to do something that's fundamentally transforming peer-to-peer, tech frameworks. So
Yeah, transforming how we network together, right? Like the
exactly.
internet sort of web concept was originally peer-to-peer, and but then it has evolved away from that a lot.
Yeah. Let's keep going. I think, well, obviously this talks about some of the events that we did. We were sponsored at DWeb in 2023. And then I think we have a couple of others on the next slide as well. And there's
And
some
for
really
those who
great
aren't
things
familiar
that,
with it, oh, sorry. I
oh, go
was gonna
ahead.
say, for those who aren't familiar with it, DWeb is the decentralized web camp. It used to be a conference. It became a camp a few years ago. And it's just a bunch of great folks that all come together and gather in the woods in Northern California. And it's got, whippersnappers. It's got even kids. It has, people in the middle of their careers, like those of us on this call. And then it's got the old guard, like the folks who invented the World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee shows up some years. And when it was a conference, you would sometimes have Vint Cerf, who invented the internet, right, alongside Bob Kahn and some other folks. And so it's a really cool event that gets pulled together every year, and it's something that feels near and dear to us. That community is just super solid. It's not that big of an event. It's a pretty small event, but it's really rich in terms of who's there, and so we
Yeah.
enjoy going every year and participating.
And we did a lot of work for that one. I mean, we built some apps, we did some testing out and demonstration of, having Holochain work in a completely offline setting. I mean, it was crazy the amount of infrastructure that we had to put in place to try to do that. But it was a
Yeah. If I could say something about that, like we were actually looking at running the event schedule, which it's like a 5-day event, and there's some open space, like times where you can schedule events through an app that we called Emergence. So we have this event scheduling app that we built for it. And the thing was that it was going to be doing it on the tomorrow day, tomorrow, where in the decentralized web, we wanted to cut the connection to the internet. So no access to DNS servers and all that kind of stuff, really only technology that is working on the local network. And then, as of course the fates would have it, not only were we having some challenges with that, but electricity went out in the whole valley for 2 hours, over 2 hours at that time. So even the Wi-Fi connections that we were going to be using locally all went down. But the really funny thing about that is everybody else who was going to be delivering their tech on that day and had little boxes that were going to be plugged into Wi-Fi and that kind of stuff couldn't demo the tech, but we had sessions scheduled and people would just stick their cell phone on the center of the table and do hotspot sharing, and then people at the table would connect, and the holochain worked over the hotspot. So even where we had no cellular access out in the woods and no Wi-Fi access, you could just drop a phone on a table, and suddenly 8 people are able to be, synchronizing via the holochain app. And so it ended up being a funny, good demonstration, but not for all the reasons expected.
It was a painful, good demonstration. It was literally, the timing was hilarious because it was like, all right, everybody ready? Go. We're gonna go start this thing. And then it was like power down. The entire valley. Nothing to do with us. Totally unrelated, but very funny. All right. So moving forward, more stuff in 2023.
Yeah, like I said, we were out and about doing things. But this is really great. We did a bunch of Web3 showcases and sort of did some work that kind of showed how Holochain kind of could play nice with blockchains, which was really great. It opened up some other conversations for us, and it allowed us also to sort of be back and engaged with the community, because our community got on and of course did a whole bunch of fun artwork and created this whole NFTs. We had leaderboards and people, doing voting for their favorite piece. And this is just some of the stuff we did. But I would say that this is really pivotal to the way that we understood what Holochain can do in relation to some of the other tech that's out there and some of the other markets. And I think it allowed us to move gracefully into 2024, where we're talking about real world assets, and how do you actually do the backing of those with verifiable data on Holochain. And that was, David, I don't know if you want to say anything about it, but I know for me, I was having a lot of fun with art games, and then suddenly you're like moving it all into other spaces, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a whole parallel story to this retrospective, which is the world has been evolving, and we're starting to become like, it's not just awareness, because a lot of the stuff we're talking about, like honestly, when I mean art and everything, a lot of the stuff that they're talking about, I didn't have a clue. You know,
Missing you.
it's what's up?
Oh, we just lost your voice for a
Oh,
second.
you lost me for a second. But there are things that now are either whether moving in through regulatory processes, through different forms of compliance activity, change. So when we talk about provenance of data and supply chains, we were talking about it 8 years ago, and everyone's like, yeah, whatever. And now we're really like companies and groups, people are really dealing with the implications of provenance, and so they're looking for solutions that can create true provenance. And actually, so I'd say like part of my retro has mainly been like, how do you listen to as much of that and know what we're ready for to start experimenting with? So as Mira's describing, one of the things that we put together at Denver, and we've shown a lot of, but the true power of this hasn't been unlocked because we made a simple demonstration of actually like an end-to-end provenance-based system where someone was generating energy, but basically riding a bike. The data from that could go into a Holochain app, and so you have that understanding of provenance. Josh File is a brilliant guy. Some of you would know, but if not, you'll get to know him over the years. He's working on some of our latest curriculum. Was then working through this system of then being able to connect it into a blockchain asset, because you can do that because you can create an asset permissionlessly. And then we're looking at secondary market interplay, and actually like there's a lot of conversations going on around the world where people are trying to solve bits of those problems.
Right.
And we've already got a thread that takes everything together, and you can go start data provenance forward, but you can also go end liquid market back. What do you need for that market? You need data provenance. I think Art and I were riffing about this a little bit on the last AMA, actually, not from an East Denver context. So that was a huge moment for me, because I think, like, firstly, it was a very, very, very ambitious thing to be able to showcase at a booth in a conference, and we got that, we actually were able to showcase it. And also it started to show me that what we're doing is on that, like, on that the tip of people's tongue. It's the thing that they now know they need to look for, that they don't yet have a name for. And that's actually exactly where you want to be in the level of maturity. And so, for part of, I think, like, for you again watching, I know I'm slightly diverging from the slide here now for a second, is that, like, for me, the major learning has been something I should have known at the start, where you can't be ready unless you've gone through the experience of being ready. So, and that's not just technology, that's learning to work together, that's learning to listen, that's learning to work out what a real problem is, where people are, like, where people move to solve those problems. It's being aligned with what's happening in the world. And that's been such a huge part. And so, again, like, I think, like, oh, it's changed a little bit later. The dynamics of the industry have shifted. But as people are like, what is readiness? I think, like, readiness is actually going through this entire process.
Yeah, in a bunch of ways, despite my own impatience or urgency, it's like the world is actually finally ready for
Yeah.
Holo Chain and Holo. Like, they're actually starting to see all of the things. Like, even just the conversations at ETH Denver, it was very easy to say to people, you know, all that stuff you wish you could do on blockchain, like that, but it's too heavy and it won't scale, or, you know, Holochain can do those things. 5 years earlier, you know, everybody just assumed blockchain was going to do everything. You could just put
Yeah.
it all on the blockchain, you know, and it would scale and it would just keep getting faster. And, you know, well, that really hasn't been the case. And people have come to kind of confront that reality more. And so now you have layer two and side chains and, you know, all this different stuff, all these other solutions for scaling. And, you know, Holochain actually does those things. And that's like just in the discourse now. And then, like you're saying about provenance, you know, and even the kinds of regulations that are coming into play in places like the EU about being able to track where products actually came from, or where food has actually come from. And like Holochain does all that kind of provenance stuff. And we built this HREA prototype. Well, Connor built it, but we were part of sponsoring, you know, an HREA prototype for this kind of provenance-based accounting, supply chain, cross-organizational accounting. And it's like all these things we were a little ahead of the curve on, people are starting to be ready for. And it was also fun at the ETH Denver group to not only to show you could generate electricity and then have, you know, electricity credits that where the provenance is all being recorded onto Holochain and you have the data stream on Holochain and that kind of stuff. But then you're issuing the tokens on an EVM. But also, so they're like, oh, so Holochain is about real world assets. I'm like, well, that's one thing. Here, let's open up these real-time collaboration tools. Let's do live spreadsheet editing with each other through a Holochain app. You know, it's like, wait, what?
Right.
You can do Google Docs type stuff through Holochain? Sure. You know, like, uh, yeah, it's just
Yeah, so
funny
what
to
you're looking up on the screen is actually one of those spreadsheets, right? Because when we talk over there, the real-time collaboration tools, and we're talking about building the Weave is sort of like the new version of the web in this context, and Moss is like the browser. And so what you're seeing here is like all the different applets that a group can come together and just collaborate with. And that, you know, it doesn't mean that everybody has to be doing it simultaneously, just like you don't have to be working on a document simultaneously with everybody in Google Docs. The point is that you don't have big tech in the middle. You don't have their servers in the middle. You don't have their watching or potential possibility of watching in the middle and everything else. You literally have a group that is a group installed with peer-to-peer applications working together without a middleman. So this is, the word, when we first started talking about this back in 2018, people used to talk a lot about disintermediation. I don't hear it as much. And yet we're still fundamentally building, dealing with trust issues with the companies and the governments or the people who are trying to make us do things the way that they want us to do things, but it doesn't fit the context of how we want to live our lives in a thriving sort of manner. And so I think this is really important to call out, because it's like, yes, these business aspects of how we're going to market are really important, but this reason why we built Holochain, which was for people to be able to connect together and be together in ways that matter to them, that make their lives work well, that was a big, huge part of the vision of what we wanted to create. And Arthur, you probably could say this, and Matt, you guys could say this 100 times better than I can, but I just want to make sure that is part of our thread that we're carrying forward here.
And I'll just add one or two more things there, which is, so I'm out on the road again, right? I came back a little over a year ago, and I've been mostly on the road running out to events or following up with folks and trying to do some business development for the ecosystem, which really means just trying to help people get started building applications and figuring out their business models and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm seeing, and I'll talk about two contexts: one, just mainstream, and then two, the blockchain kind of crypto world. In the mainstream world, between the time that we started and now, there's way more understanding, intuition, just awareness amongst the general population that our applications hijack our attention, right? Like, hey, I wanted this, I'm supposed to follow up with somebody on who messaged me on Instagram. I open the Instagram app. Then 15 minutes later, I'm like, wait, what was I supposed to do? Because as soon as I got in, I'm sucked into the stream, right? And then okay, send the message. We all recognize that that's the case. And that's just a side effect of us not actually being able to be in control of what our own user experience looks like. Holochain makes it so that people can be in control of what their own user experience looks like. And that's a radically different world. Separately, on the blockchain front, what I'm noticing is lots of people are aware that, as Arthur mentioned, scalability is an issue, but they're also aware that adoption is an issue. And some of the things that makes Holochain easier for those two things, the Weave and Moss starts to make visible. Hey, you don't need to set up a wallet to start. Hey, you don't need to start to transfer funds or deal with a cryptocurrency system that might feel scary to you in order to send a note to somebody or edit a spreadsheet or play a video game. You can just download the app, install it, open it, start. Maybe you enter a password, right? You create a password so that not just anybody can walk up to your computer and start operating it, pretending they're you. Cool. Like, that's a world of difference that some of the applications, the Weave and all the apps that people are distributing through that avenue being one of the ways in which we're seeing those. It's just making it really visible and obvious to folks. Oh, wow, this is solving problems that we are recognizing we need solved.
Yeah. Well, let's keep going.
Actually, really quick before we do, because there are people here that for sure want to get to hearing about the Holo hosting launch status and stuff, but I just want to decode the screens we're looking at, because we just talked about Weave. It says the top picture here, you see those icons going down the left side. Think of that like Discord groups, right? When you click on one of those groups, you get the icons that go across the top, which show the applications that the group is using together. And so each one of those is peer-to-peer application that only members of that group are in. There's no servers in the middle or anything like that. And the bottom screen is actually showing a part of the apps library for collaboration tools that are available in Weave. There's a whole bunch, like peer-to-peer Zoom alternative and, peer-to-peer Dropbox kind of stuff, and, all sorts of things in the mix.
All right. So here we are. and it's May 1st. Goodness, it's May Day. It's a holiday in a lot of countries. Happy May Day, or Labor Day for a lot of folks. So we're on our way. We're riding our way to Holo Launch. We got to our network RC at the end of last year, and we said we're going to be launching in 2024, and we are going to be launching in 2024. And I want to just talk a little bit about what that's going to look like. We have been doing things over the last several months, including infrastructure reviews, security audits. We've expanded our work in key management because that is a huge big part of what we are doing. I mean, it's what people relate to as the wallets, but a lot of the key management in Holochain is there. The whole point of having the cryptographic autonomy license was because you get to control those keys and that you manage those keys at the user. So we're doing additional work on that for the interfaces between Holochain and Holo. We're also working on migration testing for Holo Fuel. We're also Holochain still putting a couple of features in that are really critical for security. Some warrants work is getting completed and a few other dependencies. So we are moving forward rapidly, and we are going to be launching the Holo network in Q3 of this year. We are not launching right now. This is not the today is our launch kind of announcement. This is a little bit more about where we are right now and how we're going to be involving people. As we get into the next couple of months, we're going to be involving our users, people who are part of our Holoport Alpha network or our app manager, or I don't know, I think we call it Holo Alpha. I don't know, we have two programs. One is for the app providers and one is for our Holoports. And we're going to be working with both of y'all because we're going to be doing user acceptance testing, and our delivery teams are going to be reaching out to folks who are in the programs and setting some time up as those things approach. That's still a couple of months away because it's going to be like one of the final test pieces that we do. In the meantime, you'll start seeing changes in the Alpha network. I think right now the Alpha network's down. We're going through a big upgrade. One of the bullets that was on the last slide that we didn't really talk about is that Holochain is getting ready to do their beta 3 release soon, which is one release prior to the one that we're going to actually use for our launch, or maybe I think one release prior, might be two. We haven't named it yet, but the beta 03 release is critical for us getting our Alpha network back up, and we're in the process of we're going to be bumping all of the applications on the Holo network for the Alpha. So you'll start seeing a lot more happening there over the course of the next few weeks as those things get tested. On another front, which is really critical, there's some fun things we'll get into in a minute, which is really critical, is there is a lot of integration happening in the Holochain ecosystem for the Holo launch. And we don't talk about this all that often because I don't know if people have been following the project, we sometimes are talking about Holo development and we sometimes are talking about Holochain development, and sometimes they're separated. But here's the deal. When we launch Holo Fuel is going to be live. And Holo Fuel is a Holochain application that is going to work in both the hosted context and in a local context. Well, that means it has to work on all of the Holochain infrastructure that is being built and tested. So right now, if you guys have installed a Holochain app locally, you know that you've used either Launcher or you've used the Weave, Moss. There's a couple different ways that you can do it. Well, Launcher is getting a whole big upgrade right now. It's getting a security upgrade. It's also getting an upgrade to some new tech. And then it's going to be going through some rigorous testing with Holo Fuel. So there's lots of great work that we're finalizing right now. We've got a couple more security reviews to finish up. Yep. And we are basically, I don't know if we said it in February or September or February or March, but I think I said we were going to launch in Q2. Way back then, we definitely thought we were driving for a Q2 launch, probably June. That is moving into Q3. So this is an explicit announcement of a shift into Q3. and we are working on the security. That's mostly due to some of the security reviews. We have gotten some fabulous feedback. We are making changes. We're taking basically every recommendation that's being made by our external reviewers, and we're including that in there. We don't have to do it that way, but this is really important to us to get this right. And because we're doing this in so many contexts, we're making sure we do additional reviews after that as well. So that's a little bit what's going on in that area. I wanted to shift a little bit, because the thing is right now I'm very much focused and talking to you about development, and that doesn't mean that all the other things that we've been working on, growth and expansion into the markets, is changing. And I think there's a lot of other things to say. And Arthur, you had brought up a couple of different aspects about working with partners that you wanted to delve into. And so did you, David. I think it's time to talk a little bit about those, because those are happening in parallel right now with our work to get to launch. So let's start sharing about that.
Yeah, I think part of what we're trying to do is also expand what will be available at launch, so that we, there are other deep-in projects now that exist, and we are so decentralized physical infrastructure deep-in, that trying to do the goal of cloud hosting at the edge, right? And we are looking at we're working on partnership with a couple of these, one of which may actually be using Holo fuel, so that your Holo hosting fuel could also be getting you essentially edge-based cloud assets, not just running holochain apps. Thanks to David for the cat sharing the cat. Yeah, so that's a big one. And also that there's groups working on hardware availability, both from a USB, like install on your old hardware perspective, or buy a Holoport that actually comes with, comes set up ready to run, where we would not be the hardware supplier. We are focused on software, and the hardware tends to derail us from the software. So we're partnering with other groups on that. David, did you want to say more?
Yeah, probably a couple of things. The first around timing is that when we announced the Q2, that was a goal. Whereas as we're talking about now, well, that was a goal we believed we could achieve. Whereas what we're talking about now is work chunked into weeks and sprints to deliver the launch. And also, we're not talking about new features or this or that. I think that's the first thing I'd like to say. So it's getting increasingly real, which is part of one of the reasons for the format today. Secondly, I think what's also very exciting to me is we've talked a lot about Holochain, bits and pieces about Holo, and woven them together. Whereas Holo is starting to explicitly become its own thing, and with this launch, that's really what starts to happen. I was talking to Sean Benton from the Open Co-op, 9 months ago or so, and described Holo, and he's like, in his own words, he's kind of like, oh wow, a completely green edge computing network running on spare capacity in people's houses or in data centers where there's additional capacity is literally the holy grail of an infrastructure that can power the applications of the world. He's like, well, if you guys have really pulled this off, this is absolutely amazing. And what's happening now is that as Art said, there's groups that are interested in holofuel. There's groups that are really interested in using that network, but not for holochain only applications, but actually for other applications. And actually, there's groups that are already live using this network for their holochain powered applications. And so we're in really exciting position where we have the existing supply nodes around the world of people who've been amazingly in the alpha test group, have their holoports on, dealing with fans blowing too hard and all sorts of things over many years. So we have this committed supply that will grow. So Art said we have other people in the hardware space. We have people really interested in the hollow fuel space and in the currency space. One for hosting, but also early conversations about how that might work in other industries with other types of hardware. And you can use your imagination to start to think about how massive an opportunity that is. And then yeah, there's so many opportunities for the non-holochain hosting environment. So I think it's a very, very exciting time for Holo. And what's great is that we don't need to solve any of those problems for any of those people to launch. Actually, the launch is in our control. But what happens is with this network, we can start to tell different stories. And more importantly, we're really open for business to start to discover what are the fit of these unique products that Holo can offer to these customers, markets. And that to me is like the one of the massive drivers for launch is like launch gives us the opportunity to be able to create completely new conversations and opportunities for Holo as a business. Yeah.
Just want to take a moment. We have had so many different people working on our team over the years, but the reality is that the team of developers that are working at Holo, a lot of them have been here a long time. People stay a long time on this project, and it is the work that is put in, the commitment that's put in is profound. And I just want to put an appreciation here because we didn't talk about the team that has done all this work. And I'm so grateful for the people, for the friendships, for the love, the commitment that is present that makes this worth being in it every day, right? And that is just, I know sometimes it's about the accomplishment and the trajectory and build the big story, and yet our lives are given by the everyday moments. And my life in the everyday moments these past 6 years has been fabulous. And I just want to say thank you to everybody that I work with for making it that way.
Yeah, and sorry for destroying such a beautiful moment, but I think like one of the unique things about what we're doing and how we're doing it is that almost we could echo the same story for people who aren't in the team, but people who come across and discover Holochain and commit their lives to it, whether they're engineers who are in the ecosystem. But I noticed there's a little note Mary mentioned that's like we've talked a little bit about what we're doing with Vola and and having Holochain on mobile and some of the things that it can unlock for a community project like Vola, and then also other things that people again can imagine that unlocks in the holochain sense. But Vola also come from Dr. Vertzer, their CEO, scouring the world for innovative technologies and deciding that holochain is something that can transform, or not transform, can enable his vision for mobile. Yeah. And so building on what Mary's saying, yeah, exactly, is that we also have to thank, because we can't do it without the team and we can't do it without the Dr. Vertzes. And there are so many more than we can imagine. And they've been integral to every year. You know, we can go back to people who supported us in 2016, 2017. So many people have seen that this is an opportunity to do something they've always wanted to with their lives, with their business, with technology, and have made that step. And it's like the coming together of the team and the ecosystem that's enabling this.
You didn't ruin my moment, David.
Well, I did at the start.
All right. Well, that's what we have today, guys.
Memes?
Ah, yes, the memes. We had a page at the very end. This was a lot of fun going into the history books essentially of Holochain and finding all of these things. This is part of what, David, to what you were talking about, the people in the community. I know you were talking about the projects, but really it's also the creativity, the joy, and the support. And these are some of our favorites. I think it's very, very fitting that we have a kitty with our Holo glasses on, given the last few minutes of the uh, video that we just were watching. But yeah, the Holo Monday folks who have been, tweeting and, putting out, like, just creating the energy in the community ecosystem has been pretty fabulous. And these are some of our favorites. There were so many to choose from, though. So if we didn't pick one that you created, apologies. These are ones that kind of gave us a sense of like, yeah, we're creating something out of this world. We're still moving up. It's got connections to new tech, connections to nature, connections to, the world and what we're about. And then some weird things, like forging the Holo logo. I don't really know what that's all about, but hey, it's otherworldly, right?
I'm glad we didn't pick any of the memes that involved me. It's not always fun to be, the subject of a meme, like whether it was surfing or just a shot of me sitting there or something. It was like, oh, okay, all right. I guess now I'm a character. I mean, I'm a character. I get it, but nonetheless.
Yeah, there were a lot of those with faces, and some of them were really bad. You could really tell actually the before AI, after AI memes. Block picture faces on top of old photos. Anyway, thank you everybody for being on this AMA. We're sure to have other ones with lots of things that are happening in the coming months, and we look forward to working with you, testing with you, and chatting with you in the future.
Thanks all. Take care.